The moment I hit send on yet another $10,000 wire transfer to Bryce, I felt that familiar twist in my stomach, a mix of love and quiet exhaustion. Little did I know that in less than 24 hours, the man I had been secretly dating for 18 months, the one I thought was barely scraping by as a freelance photographer in Brooklyn, would be exposed as the long-lost heir to Harrington Tech, one of the biggest corporations in America, leaving me questioning every single moment we had shared together. I first met Bryce on a rainy Tuesday afternoon at a little coffee shop in Williamsburg where the air smelled like fresh espresso and old vinyl records. I was Anthony Reyes, 28 years old, a graphic designer who had moved from Chicago to New York chasing bigger dreams and maybe a little freedom from the traditional expectations my Filipino-American family still held on to back home. My parents still sent me weekly texts asking when I would bring home a nice girl and settle down, never once suspecting that the reason I avoided those questions was because my heart had always leaned toward men. Bryce walked in soaked from the rain, his dark hair plastered to his forehead, and that easy smile lighting up his green eyes like he owned the whole damn city. He ordered a black coffee, no sugar, and when he realized he had left his wallet at his studio, he laughed it off with such genuine charm that I offered to pay without thinking twice. That small act started everything. We talked for hours about art, photography, and the way the city lights looked at midnight from a rooftop. He told me he was 29 working odd jobs to cover his mom's medical bills after she had a stroke last year, and I believed him because his stories felt so real, the way he described the hospital visits, the late nights worrying. By our third date, we were kissing under the Brooklyn Bridge, and I knew I was falling hard. Bryce made me feel seen in a way no one else ever had, like my quiet struggles with coming out and my fear of disappointing my family actually mattered. He never pushed me to tell them about us, and that patience felt like the safest kind of love. 6 months in, things got tighter for him. His freelance gigs dried up, he said, and the medical bills kept piling up. I had just landed a big contract with a tech startup, so I offered to help. $10,000 a month, just until he got back on his feet. I told him, wiring the money from my savings account without hesitation. Bryce hugged me so tight that night, whispering that no one had ever cared for him like this, and I believed every word because his eyes were wet with real tears. We spent weekends exploring the city, holding hands only when we were sure no one from my office or his supposed circle was around. My best friend Jake, a fellow designer who knew I was gay, kept warning me to be careful, but I brushed it off. Bryce was different. He understood the pressure I felt every time my mom called asking about my dating life. As the months passed, our routine became my anchor. I would wake up in my small apartment in Queens, drive to his modest studio in Bushwick, and we would cook breakfast together, laughing about silly things like the way he burned toast every single time. He never asked for more money than we agreed on, and he always promised to pay me back once his photography career took off. I never doubted him, not even when Jake pointed out that Bryce seemed to have expensive camera gear for someone always broke. Love blinded me, or maybe I just wanted it to. The city pulsed around us, full of possibilities, and for the first time, I felt like I could build a future with another man without the weight of secrets crushing me. But then the cracks started showing in small ways I tried to ignore. Bryce would disappear for hours, saying he had to meet a client, and come back smelling like expensive cologne instead of the cheap stuff he usually wore. I told myself it was nothing, just my own insecurities talking, because coming from a family that valued stability over everything, I was always waiting for the other shoe to drop. One night after I wired the latest payment, he pulled me close on his worn-out couch and said, "Anthony, you are the only real thing in my life." I kissed him back, believing it with every beat of my heart. Little did I know that belief was about to be tested in the most brutal way possible when the morning news hit like a freight train. The next day, I was at my desk scrolling through headlines when the photo popped up. There was Bryce standing on a stage in a tailored suit, shaking hands with the CEO of Harrington Tech, the company that had just announced its new leadership after decades of mystery around the founder's only son, who had vanished years ago to live off the grid. The caption read, "Bryce Harrington steps forward as sole heir to multi-billion-dollar empire." My coffee mug slipped from my hand and crashed to the floor. $10,000 a month for over a year, every cent I could spare, and the man I loved had been hiding an entire fortune. My phone buzzed with a text from Bryce, but I couldn't bring myself to open it. The room spun as the full weight of what this meant crashed down on me. I sat frozen at my desk staring at the screen until my boss asked if I was okay. I mumbled something about a migraine and left the office early, my legs moving on autopilot through the crowded subway back to Queens. The entire ride, I replayed every conversation, every late-night confession Bryce had ever given me, searching for the lie that must have been there all along. How could the same man who cried in my arms about hospital bills be the heir to one of the most powerful tech dynasties in the country? The Harrington family had been in the news for years, their reclusive founder dying, without publicly naming his successor until now. And Bryce, my Bryce, was that successor. When I finally reached my apartment, I poured a glass of whiskey and stared at the transfer history on my banking app. $180,000 gone to support a man who never needed it. The anger came first, hot and sharp, but it was quickly drowned out by a deeper ache, the fear that everything we had built was fake. My phone kept lighting up with calls from Bryce, but I silenced it and opened a message from my mom instead. She had sent a photo of my cousin's new baby with the usual caption, "When will we meet your special someone?" I laughed bitterly because the special someone I had been hiding for a year and a half was apparently richer than my entire extended family combined. Jake showed up unannounced that evening with takeout and a six-pack, sensing something was wrong from my earlier texts. He listened without interrupting as I spilled everything: the financial support, the hidden identity, the way Bryce had looked me in the eye and promised he was struggling. Jake's face hardened. "I told you to be careful, man," he said quietly. "People like that don't date guys like us without an angle." His words stung because deep down I had wondered the same thing, but I had chosen to trust instead. We sat in silence for a while, the city noise filtering through the window, until my phone buzzed again, this time with a text from Bryce that simply read, "We need to talk. Please." I didn't reply. Instead, I spent the night pacing, replaying our first date, the way Bryce had laughed when I paid for his coffee, the way he had listened when I confessed how hard it was to be gay in a family that still prayed for grandkids every Sunday. Was any of it real, or had I been a convenient cover, a normal guy who made him feel grounded while he played poor? The next morning, I woke up to a knock at my door. Bryce stood there in jeans and a hoodie, looking nothing like the polished Heir from the news photos. His eyes were red-rimmed, and for the first time since we met, he looked truly scared. "Anthony," he started, but I cut him off. "How long were you going to keep lying to me?" I asked, my voice shaking. $10,000 a month, Bryce. For what exactly? He stepped inside, closing the door behind him, and the familiar scent of his cologne hit me like a punch. "It wasn't a lie," he said quietly. "Not all of it. My mother did have a stroke, but the bills were never the issue. I just wanted to know what it felt like to be loved for me, not for the Harrington name. I've spent my whole life running from that world, the board meetings, the fake friends, the pressure to be perfect. When I met you, I finally felt free. I wanted to believe him. God, I wanted to. But the hurt ran too deep. I told him to leave, and he did without another word. The door clicked shut, and I sank to the floor, the weight of every secret we had both carried pressing down on my chest. That afternoon, I called my sister in Chicago, the only person in my family who knew I was gay, and told her everything. She listened, and then said softly, "Maybe this is the universe forcing you to stop hiding too, Anthony." Her words echoed in my head for days while I threw myself into work, trying to forget the man who had upended my entire world. Bryce didn't give up. He sent flowers with notes explaining his childhood, the way his father had kept him out of the spotlight to protect him from the media, the way he had chosen a simple life in Brooklyn to find himself. I read every one, but I couldn't reply. The misunderstanding grew when I saw photos online of Bryce at charity galas standing next to beautiful women and powerful men. My mind twisted them into proof that he had been using me all along. Jake tried to talk sense into me, but I was too raw. The psychological toll was brutal: nights of barely sleeping, days where I questioned my own judgment, my own worth. How could I have been so blind? Then came the turning point I never saw coming. My parents announced they were flying to New York for a surprise visit. The pressure I had been avoiding for years suddenly became impossible to ignore. I had to decide whether to keep hiding who I was or finally face the truth about myself and the man I still loved despite everything. The week my parents arrived in New York, I felt like I was walking through quicksand. Mom and Dad checked into a hotel in Midtown and immediately started planning family dinners, asking about my social life, with that hopeful tone that always made my stomach drop. I introduced them to Jake as my roommate to keep things simple, but the lie sat heavy on my tongue. Every time Mom asked if I was seeing anyone, I changed the subject, talking about work deadlines instead. Meanwhile, Bryce's messages kept coming, each one more vulnerable than the last. He explained how he had left the family fortune at 21 after a massive fight with his father over wanting to live authentically. The photography, the simple studio, they were all real choices, not an act. But the money I had given him, he had donated every cent to a local LGBTQ youth shelter without me knowing. I wanted to believe him, yet the betrayal still burned. One evening after dinner with my parents, I walked through Central Park replaying our happiest memories, the night we danced in his kitchen to old jazz records, the weekend we drove upstate and watched the sunrise. Those moments felt too genuine to be fake. But then I remembered the bank statements, and the anger returned. When I got home, Jake was waiting with news. He had done some digging and confirmed that Bryce's mother really had been ill, and that Bryce had quietly paid for her care without ever touching the family trust. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had been a pawn in some rich guy's experiment with normal life. The misunderstanding exploded 2 days later when my mom accidentally saw a text from Bryce pop up on my phone while I was in the shower. The message read, "I miss you, Anthony. I love you." She waited until Dad was out for a walk, then confronted me with tears in her eyes. "Is there something you want to tell us, son?" Her voice was gentle, but the disappointment was clear. In that moment, every fear I had carried since high school came rushing back, the lectures about family legacy, the prayers for a traditional marriage. I broke down and told her everything about Bryce, about being gay, about the money, about the shocking truth that had just come out. Mom sat in silence for a long time, then hugged me and whispered, "We just want you happy." But the words felt fragile, like they could shatter at any moment. That night I finally called Bryce. He answered on the first ring, and we met at our favorite rooftop bar overlooking the city. The moment I saw him, my resolve cracked. He looked exhausted, but still so handsome in a simple black jacket. We sat across from each other, and the words tumbled out. "Why didn't you trust me with the truth?" I asked. Bryce reached for my hand, but I pulled back. "Because I was terrified that once you knew who I really was, you would see me the same way everyone else does, as a walking bank account. The money you gave me, Anthony, it was the most honest love I have ever received, because you thought I had nothing. I donated every dollar to that shelter because I wanted to be worthy of you." His confession hung between us, raw and real. I told him about my parents, about the pressure and the relief of finally saying the words out loud. For the first time, we talked without secrets, and the connection felt deeper than ever. But just as hope started to bloom, my phone rang. It was Jake, sounding panicked. "Dude, you need to see this. Someone leaked photos of us together from months ago, and the tabloids are running with the story, Heir's secret boyfriend." The betrayal hit like a slap. I had trusted Jake with everything, and now our private life was splashed across the internet. Bryce's face paled when I showed him the article. "This is what I was protecting you from," he said quietly. "The media will tear us apart." We left the bar separately to avoid more photos, but the damage was done. My parents saw the news before I could explain, and Dad's call the next morning was ice cold. "Is this why you never brought anyone home? Because of him?" The family expectations I had feared for years crashed down all at once. I spent the night alone, staring at the ceiling, wondering if love between two men could ever survive this kind of spotlight and betrayal. The psychological weight was crushing. Every decision I had made, every sacrifice, suddenly felt questioned. The tabloid storm lasted a full week, with headlines screaming about the Harrington heirs' hidden gay relationship and the mysterious payments from an ordinary designer. My inbox flooded with interview requests, and my parents stopped answering my calls. I holed up in my apartment, dodging the paparazzi outside, while Jake tried to apologize for leaking the photos, claiming he thought it would force me to confront the truth. His betrayal cut deep, fracturing the one friendship I had relied on through everything. Bryce kept texting, begging to meet, but I needed space to breathe. The city that had once felt like freedom now closed in around me, with every notification another reminder that our love was no longer private. On the 8th day, Bryce showed up at my door with a suitcase and determination in his eyes. I let him in because despite everything, my heart still raced at the sight of him. He set the suitcase down and said, "I am walking away from the company, Anthony. I already told the board I am not taking the CEO role. They can keep the fortune. I just want the life we were building before any of this came out." His words stunned me. "You would give up billions for me?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "For us," he corrected. because none of it means anything without you. We spent the night talking through every misunderstanding, the fear that had kept him silent, the pressure that had kept me hiding. For the first time, I saw the full picture: the boy who had run from a golden cage to find real love, and the man who had given everything he had to protect it. But the turning point came the next morning when my sister flew in unannounced. She sat us both down and said, "You two have been through hell, but running from who you are is not the answer." She showed me messages from Mom, who had been processing everything and was ready to meet Bryce. The gesture cracked open something inside me, a hope I thought was gone. We agreed to a quiet family dinner at my apartment, no press, no drama. When my parents arrived, the air was thick with tension, but Bryce shook Dad's hand with respect and answered every question honestly. By dessert, Mom was laughing at his stories, and Dad was nodding thoughtfully. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start, the kind of acceptance I had dreamed about for years. That night, after everyone left, Bryce pulled me onto the balcony under the stars. He took my hands and said, "I am sorry for every second I made you doubt us. From now on, no more secrets." I kissed him, then deeper and more certain than ever before. The emotional release was overwhelming, tears mixing with laughter as we held each other. Yet the societal pressure didn't vanish overnight. The next day, a board member from Harrington Tech called Bryce, threatening to cut him off completely if he walked away. Bryce hung up without hesitation, choosing me over the empire. The sacrifice was huge, and I felt its weight in every conversation we had about the future. Could I ever be enough for a man who had given up everything? Jake reached out with a long apology letter admitting his jealousy had clouded his judgment. I met him for coffee, and we talked for hours, rebuilding the trust slowly. The friendship that had once felt unbreakable was mending piece by piece, teaching me that even the strongest bonds require work. As the weeks passed, Bryce and I settled into a new rhythm. He took a job at a small photography studio, refusing any family money, and I supported him the way I always had, only now it felt equal. The misunderstandings that had nearly destroyed us became lessons in communication, and the secrets that once divided us now strengthened our resolve. The months that followed tested us in ways I never imagined. Bryce's decision to renounce his inheritance made headlines again, this time with stories praising his courage or calling him a fool. We faced protests outside our new shared apartment in Brooklyn from distant relatives who felt entitled to the fortune, and late-night calls from lawyers trying to change his mind. Through it all, Bryce remained steady, his green eyes full of quiet determination whenever he looked at me. I quit my job at the big agency and started my own freelance studio, giving us both the freedom to build something real. My family visits became more frequent, Mom even sending recipes for Bryce's favorite dishes, a small but powerful sign of acceptance that healed old wounds inside me. Yet the psychological scars lingered. Nights when I woke up sweating from dreams where Bryce left me for his old life, or where my father turned away forever. Bryce would pull me close, whispering affirmations until the fear faded. One weekend, we drove upstate to the same cabin where we had watched the sunrise years earlier. Sitting by the lake, he told me about the day he decided to disappear from the Harrington world, the loneliness that followed until he met me. I shared my own journey, the years of hiding my identity, the relief when I finally came out to my sister. The conversation stretched late into the night, and when we made love, it was tender and honest, free of any shadows. The biggest challenge came when Harrington Tech faced a crisis, and the board begged Bryce to return as a consultant. They offered him a role with no strings attached, promising he could keep his simple life. I saw the conflict in his eyes, the pull of duty versus the freedom we had fought for. We talked for hours, weighing every angle until he made his choice. He agreed to help temporarily, but only if I came with him to the meetings as his partner. Walking into that glass tower hand in hand felt surreal, the same executives who had once dismissed me now nodding with respect. The experience taught me that true power wasn't in money but in standing together against the world. During those corporate visits, I witnessed Bryce's strength firsthand, the way he negotiated deals while staying true to his values. It deepened my love and also my understanding of the man I had almost lost. Back home, Jake became a regular part of our circle, his earlier betrayal forgiven because we all grew from it. My parents even hosted a small barbecue where Dad pulled Bryce aside for a quiet talk about responsibility and family. The moment felt like full circle, the traditional expectations I once feared now evolving into something warmer, and more inclusive. But just when life seemed steady, another revelation hit. Bryce discovered that his late father had left a letter addressed to him hidden in the company vault. In it, the old man admitted he had always known about Bryce's sexuality and regretted not supporting him sooner. The words brought Bryce to tears, and we read it together on the couch, the truth finally healing old family wounds. That night we made plans for the future, a small wedding someday, maybe adopting kids, the kind of ordinary dreams that now felt extraordinary because we had earned them through fire. The growth was undeniable. I was no longer the man who wired money out of fear. I was someone who chose love every single day with eyes wide open. The following spring we stood on the same rooftop where we had first talked after the secret came out. Bryce had sold his last remaining shares in Harrington Tech, donating the proceeds to the LGBTQ youth shelter that had quietly thrived because of the money I once gave him. I watched him sign the papers with steady hands and felt a surge of pride, so strong it brought tears to my eyes. We had survived the misunderstandings, the betrayal, the family pressures, and the societal glare. Our love was no longer hidden, it was celebrated by the people who mattered most. My parents flew in for the weekend, and even Jake brought his new boyfriend to celebrate with us. The city lights twinkled below like stars applauding our journey, and for the first time, I felt completely at peace with who I was and who I loved. Bryce turned to me that evening, the wind ruffling his hair, and said, "Anthony, you saved me long before I ever saved myself. You taught me that real wealth is measured in trust and courage, not dollars." I pulled him into my arms, and we kissed under the open sky, the kind of kiss that carried every trial we had overcome. The emotional high was indescribable, the kind that only comes after walking through darkness and choosing light together. We talked about the future late into the night, planning simple things like weekend getaways, and maybe opening a small gallery where Bryce could teach photography to kids who needed guidance the same way he once did. As the months turned into years, our story became a quiet inspiration for friends in the community. I watched Bryce grow into the man he was always meant to be, confident, grounded, and unapologetically himself. I grew too, learning to set boundaries with my family while still honoring our roots and standing proudly beside the man I loved. The sacrifices we both made, the truths we confronted, they all led to a bond stronger than any fortune could buy. Looking back, I realized the $10,000 a month had never been about money. It had been about showing up for someone when they needed it most. And in the end, that simple act of love had rewritten both our destinies. We sat on the rooftop one final evening, watching the sun set over the skyline. Bryce squeezed my hand and smiled the same smile that had started everything years ago. Whatever comes next, we face it together. I nodded, knowing in my heart that we had finally found the acceptance we both deserved. The city hummed around us, full of possibility, and for the first time, I wasn't afraid of what tomorrow would bring. True or false? Can a relationship built on a hidden identity ever lead to genuine acceptance and love?